Hi, this is Scott Richards, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
We were just talking off mic about the world that we live in. A lot of times I'll get a phone call about something. I'm actually working on something right now where this outlandish thing falls into my lap. Can you help me do this thing that's impossible, involves governments and billionaires? Like, oh, okay, let me try. Now, this for anybody watching on my end. I'm not going to speak for Scott. This has nothing to do with my former life as a spy, but it's all as a result of the fact that I have this show and I have these connections, and so it's akin, but it's not the same thing. And I'm always interested in trying to help someone. Always want that, but I've become a lot more choosy on what I get involved in because it's just this work that we do is often exhausting, dangerous,
Mhm.
and you enter into. I find myself entering into waters where I really don't belong. It's not my world. I'm good at entering other worlds. I don't know how long that will be good for me because if a trap springs, I'm helpless, and
Yeah.
it's very stressful.
I mean, I deal with these things almost on a daily level, and in varying degrees of complexity, and you have to do an assessment, of the particular case to work out the merits of it, and legality of it, the claims that are being made, um, and you know, there's often a lot of promises that if you do this and if you do that, then you'll be paid and whatever else, but most of the time you don't, and it's just it is exhausting doing this work, and you have to choose if it's not paying work, is there a gain or a benefit, or righting a wrong, or solving an injustice for a family, or reuniting a family, or fixing something that was clearly broken. For the most part, yeah, I mean, it will consume your whole life, and I've said to
Right.
people before, you don't go to the doctor with cancer and say, hey doc, if you cure me of cancer, I'll pay you.
Yeah.
um, and
Right.
that's the sort of attitude that you get a lot of the time, is that you should do this for me because and it's when you're talking about very wealthy people who are the worst for that, asking for
Yeah.
free help, um, because they feel that at some level we should be thankful that someone with a great deal of wealth is asking for assistance, but ultimately it's their problem, not mine nor yours. But it's a
Yeah.
commonality. It's just got to be really picky because it will eat your life, and
It does.
people who pay the least demand the most. People who pay nothing demand everything.
Yeah. The other thing that's funny and again, this is just my experience, but when I go on these adventures, and again, I love adventures. I love trying to
Mhm.
solve problems. I love connecting. I love all these things. But on the other side of the
Yeah.
ledger, I'm like, oh. So I don't need to go to the Hotel International. Just,
Hmm.
a safe place to lay down and go to sleep is good for me. But I have to bill them for the
Hmm.
Hotel International and the room service.
Hmm.
Otherwise, they're like, what's going on? What's going like they
Hmm.
expect me to fleece them, but then they don't want to pay me. So I
No.
can ring up all of the exorbitant fees on taxi cabs and all kinds of other things. But the second I say, I need to get this money, then it becomes hard. And I'm like, what is
Yeah.
going on? So this seems, I don't know if you've experienced this thing, but they'd rather me stay instead of staying at a hostel and just because I'm just going there to fall asleep and pass out until I wake up and get back to
Hmm.
work, right?
Hmm.
Instead of doing that, they want me to go waste my time in a very nice hotel, lovely, but doesn't do anything for me. I'd rather have the money in my pocket to spend how I
Yeah.
want.
Oh, I mean, it's just your time's not being valued, uh, and that's unfair, you know, to you as a service provider of skill, to not have your time valued. You don't call the plumber and just say, thanks, mate. I'll give you a sandwich for the work. And that's what I found out with very wealthy people, is that they want to pay you with a dinner or a pat on the back, and it's like, I don't need
Right.
it. I know plenty of
Yeah.
billionaires. I know plenty of these. This isn't
Right.
special. And but
Right.
that's and there are times with people who truly have nothing, and people who have been wronged, or in a situation that they just don't know how to defend themselves,
Mm.
how to protect their rights or their interests, and that are more worthy of like saying, okay, I'll put some time and into this. And generally, when I take a job, I will do it until it's done. If it's
Mm.
6 months, if it's a year, I'll still be here working.
Yeah.
I get that if it's something that I've really taken on. You just got to make those choices. about what fights it is that we choose to take, why we choose to take them. It's complicated.
It is complicated. At one point in time, they were having trouble banking because this is one of the ways we try to fight things. And for good or
Mhm.
for bad, nothing illegal is necessarily happening, at least not on my end. But they have to pay me in cash. And I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, how do I move this cash? Because anytime you carry any amount of money that's worth
Mhm.
anything, you talk all of a sudden you're like, ugh, how do I do this? And they don't want to send it in a box in the mail, kind of thing. So
Yeah.
I was trying to figure out how to get this money home, and that became a big problem to where we weren't really able to sort out terms because they couldn't move money internationally because of the situation that they're in. Again,
Mhm.
I'm not breaking the law. I don't know if they are or not, but they were unable to satisfy those things. So I ended up having to take less money so that I
Mhm.
could do the work because we just couldn't find a legal way to move the money. And that to me was crazy, but people who need help are in those kind
Yeah.
of positions.
I mean, we can end up in for no real fault. Um, One can find oneself on the wrong side of something
Yeah,
quite
right.
easily, and then find yourself debanked or these sorts of things. Um, and it's quite a harrowing experience being pushed out of the system. And these are complicated situations. We live in a very, very complex world, and sometimes these decisions that are impactful are really quite arbitrary, or not really necessarily based on a certain standard of evidence or a certain a claim of substance.
Right.
And so when you're defending against these sorts of things, you have to know how the system works to correct something, and that's an expertise to do that. But I see it more and more these days.
Mm,
Um, this is kind of really, I don't know, it's almost reflexive at times. How but whether it be health or whether it be banking for some people,
right. Right.
whether it be banking for companies that are operating in normal jurisdictions and normal things. Um, One of the challenges that we had repatriating to the UK has been I don't have a credit rating here.
Right.
And so you can't get a broadband internet connection. You can't do these certain things. It's very hard to find, even small credit building cards just to get a footprint. And so you have to go through this very long, drawn out process
Hmm.
um, just to kind of be able to operate normally. But
Yeah.
yeah, the world
Yeah.
is exceedingly complicated right now. High friction for not really any good reason that I can determine.
Yeah. It's in the world that you work in, and I have worked in, and occasionally I get offered to do things into. Quite often, the thing that the people are doing is, again, it's extra legal. It's how they're getting, but they live in a place that is not as stable as I am. So like
Mhm,
I can talk openly about this. When I was in Iraq, we would find people
mhm.
selling gas on the gray or black market, depending on how
Yeah,
you want to look at it. I don't care. That's not what I'm there to
exactly.
worry about. I want you to survive. This is how you can make your money. Let me buy some gas. And
Mhm,
we were talking to one guy, and I'm like, how much money do you make a day in gas? And it was nothing. And I ripped off that daily amount and gave it to him and said, here, today is
mhm.
covered. Sell all the gas you want, but here's an easy day for you. And
Yeah,
because I was trying to curry favor with someone that maybe could help me out to do something, a very common thing. And my
mhm.
partner was like, whoa, in the context of there, you just gave that guy a whole day's pay, and I'm like, who cares? Like
Yeah,
it was a number below $100, so it was nothing.
yeah,
And I'm like, look, we have to use this money, and if this is going to help this guy, even if it does nothing for us, maybe he introduces us. I don't care. I'm
yeah.
investing less than $100 in some good favor, but if because my partner, and to his credit, he's doing the right thing. And he wasn't as seasoned in the job as I was. He's like, but this guy's selling gas
Yeah.
in the black market. What else is he doing that's illegal? And I'm like, I don't know. He hasn't liked us yet.
I
so,
mean, the
so
gas black market was very complex in Iraq, though. It was
yeah,
almost necessary, um,
yes,
just ordinary people. So when you get a war economy, you will inherently get some kind of black market economy. And
right,
the term black market sounds very sinister,
right,
um, but it's actually just an unregulated, undocumented commerce that can become absolutely essential to being able to get some kinds of goods or some
Right.
kind of services when the government has collapsed and the government isn't providing these things. We saw it in Afghanistan all along, and it's, I started to bring that paradigm into conversations with the development agencies and RS and others, that we need to think more carefully about the irregular economy rather than taking a heavy hand on it all the time, because it is just people adapting to a situation, to a
Right.
circumstance, and we need to understand that. Because they're not going to have invoices. A lot of these people can't read and write in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. And in my line of
so,
work, you're supposed to provide like a receipt. And I'm like, look,
yeah.
there's no receipt. This guy doesn't have a Zon machine. Beep. They don't have that. And I know there's an allowance, and I was well below the
Yeah.
allowance. As long as you're not stealing the money, Anyhow,
Mm-hmm.
I want to move forward on this because so you end up at the ground level. We talk about ground truth a lot when you and I talk,
Mm-hmm.
and we go out and we're trying to work these things. But as you climb the ladder of responsibility and prestige, um, it becomes shockingly indifferent to things. You kind of alluded to this a second ago, where you might be working in a situation where let's say I work for the U.S. government. I work for the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
government, and three bosses up, that person determines the way I treat Russians versus Ukrainians, and I'm to
Mm-hmm.
decide what they are, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
of that person's influence. And if I don't satisfy that person, I don't keep my job, I don't promote, I don't get
Mm-hmm.
out of Ukraine or whatever. And these influences make a difference because now I've got to act in a different way because I can't trust this person. I have to look
Mm-hmm.
at them through the wrong lens. And if you're internal in an organization, it's very hard to shake that off. The State Department here for the U.S. is terrible at this. And there's a lot of ill-principled behavior where we put something on someone or we'll promise that we'll do things. I was just having a conversation with a guy kind of like you who has
Mm-hmm.
done a lot of work in Iraq in the last, well, he's never stopped. And he was saying, there's three kind of Iraqis. There's the kind that hate us no matter what. They're probably Shia. There's the kinds that are disappointed in us because we screwed up the
Mm-hmm.
Sunni side of the system. And then there's the third
Mm-hmm.
kind. It's like, you guys just never come through. You have all this money, all this talent, and
Yeah.
everything else. And I look around and we're constantly worse off. This has a bill to pay for the
Mm-hmm.
foreseeable future for us.
Oh, I mean, there's a number of things to unpack in that. I mean, when you're working for the military or whatever, even in your role, which has probably a bit more elasticity, you're still a tool of policy, and policy is, at the whim of the politician, and the whim of the narrative and the objective, and that's fed down to DoD. Permeates out of State Department into DoD. This is where we stand. This is the enemy, and this is things, and we bring back language of opposition and dehumanization in war because it's just expedient, but it's not a reality. I've been fortunate enough that I generally work alongside host nation or community as an advocate, I guess is the easiest way, or an advisor. So I get to represent things to what I would hope is more objectively, or to a better contextual understanding of something, like when we talk about a regular economy, and to what role that irregular economy plays. So that's where I get a lot more latitude generally. Not necessarily liked in some meetings, but it is important to have a degree of healthy friction, and I think to have just a degree of nearest objectivity to a problem. Because what we have is a world where, and I watch it at the moment, we are not solving problems, which goes to what you're saying. War is spreading, the economies are in dire straits around the world, and nothing is getting better. Nothing is getting more peaceful, nothing is getting more sensible, nothing is getting more stable. It's just getting more uncertain. And to the US's ability to partner in conflict or in development or stabilization or whatever the new old paradigm will be, is dramatically affected because we have not succeeded. We have not succeeded in Iraq. We did not succeed in Afghanistan. We did not succeed in Libya. We didn't succeed anywhere. And so how do you come to those countries and say, yeah, we're here to build your country and help you get on your feet when we've left them as in ruins? This kind of goes into something else that we were talking about before and what to discuss, is that we don't just have that bad reputation, and the U.S. ultimately withdrawing as the hegemon. And that kind of felt like it was, Trump's objective was to be isolationist and to take America back to what it was before it engaged in World War II. And he does that. And the first time we were really looking at economic policies that were the 60s and 70s with steel, oil, cars. This is the world that he understood a prosperous America as. And then went back. This is where he got the tariffs from and bringing industry back and all that stuff. But the other telling part of the U.S. not being the hegemon is that the United States has been unable to coerce a peace between Israel and Hamas. It's been unable to restrain Netanyahu. It's been unable to restrain Putin. It's been unable to really achieve, any of these, goals that, the hegemon is meant to be able to do. And when it can't do that, and we get pushback, then America's prestige is just diminishing. And then that will have later on effects for, a number of things. De-dollarization becomes more possible because if, the retaliatory capacities of the U.S. aren't, as we all thought, in terms of trade with the back and forth with the tariffs, up and down with the tariffs, then will countries that are troubled by the stability of the U.S. as the hegemon be less afraid of de-dollarization. And when we have economic policies or like overruling the World Trade Organization, the WTO becomes meaningless overnight. And at the same time, we've got international law being, one of the things I said a lot, and I've raised in Congress as well with a bunch of congressional staffers, and I raised, all through, kind of the U.S. politics when I was briefing about Gaza as a representative of the hostage families, was that the risk that we have in Netanyahu's war is that we will erode or see the erosion of rules-based order and international law. And that's what's happened. So now we have a situation where how can we go to a negotiating table and say, you're doing terrible things, we're going to sanction you because you're blowing up hospitals and you're doing that. And it's like, well, your ally has been doing that extensively. And it's a very, very difficult place. So that we kind of live in a world now where we can't say international law is something that we should all obey, because if it's only used punitively against countries that aren't considered to be tier 1 Western allies, then it's not law. It's something else. But it's a really, really tough world that we are in at the moment. And where this goes, because now everything is fluid. You can get advantage by breaking out of rules-based order for a short period of time, and there's no penalty for not doing that. It's allowed, and in some ways it looks like recent U.S. policy is encouraging the deterioration of rules-based order with the idea that if American companies don't have so many regulations with foreign corrupt practices or whatever else, then they can be more agile and win more contracts by being able to pay bribes, and compete with the Chinese somewhere. That's not healthy, because those lines get blurred and blurred and blurred and blurred, and we end up with no moral standing on the international, domain.
Yeah. Is this? I guess the question I want to ask right now is this Is this a new problem? Probably the safest way to ask this, because I'm not trying to ask, is this Donald Trump's fault? Why are we in this position? When did this start? And was it inevitable?
I think this has been a decay over a very, very long time in America, and it's not Trump's fault. It's more that he's the conclusion of a process that began 30 or 40 years ago.
Okay.
And a lot of the behaviors that we see very open and public were certainly done by the Democrats very privately beforehand. So I mean, it's not like it's just open now. It's just very in your face now. But Trump's approach, I mean, my first thought when he was running and won the presidency was that the Trump that we had before in his first term, the world was very different. And now it's changed. And it's not the same world when he was president last time. It's not even close. It's multipolar. We have entrenched, sort of dictatorial, totalitarian leadership engaged in conflicts. We have in the UN as a resolving body. It has less power, and it's just dramatically different. And so when you challenge someone like Putin, or you challenge someone like Netanyahu, who's been in power also for 20 years, and or Erdogan or Orban, none of these people care about the ballot box. So Trump's tool set and his admiration of strong men, he's discovering that these are real strong men. These are men that do not have a hostile government. These are men in total control of their environments, at least at present.
Right.
And that's a very hard thing to have leverage over. He kind of seems to go out with this business approach to these problems. But for these men, it's power. It's not business, it's power. So it's a wild world.
What do we do about that? I mean, let me back up. So I know a number of diplomats. I know a number of people who have ambassador in their title, and of course they're shocked by Donald Trump's style because look, he doesn't do anything gentle or subtle, right? It's always big and sometimes this works for him, right? So let's give credit where credit's due. But he does not make the establishment feel comfortable, which again, good and bad, right? So they're not going to enjoy it. But they were crying about, and I'm being mean to these guys, they were hollering about the problems of foreign policy before Donald Trump. And for those of us that remember, Joe Biden had no friends in the foreign policy world. He was bad at it. He would say ridiculous things.
Difficult.
Yeah. And
very, very difficult.
There is a default arrogance that I've seen at the ground level, right? So you got the guy way up top who's like, don't like Russians, whatever. Okay. And then down at the bottom, anytime I came across United States Department of State, USAID, or their NGOs, I knew that I could focus on these elements because they were causing disruption. And I came up with the rule that wherever the U.S. goes, we're a net destabilizer, and it's worse when it's State Department, USAID, and NGOs because they're too arrogant and they don't give a fuck about the results.
No, they don't. And I've seen the same things, and I've seen just bizarre programs invented. And USAID came under Kennedy. It was a tool of, it was an element. It was subversive, in order to kind of influence populations and economies and countries. So I mean, I generally don't have an opinion on U.S. domestic politics because I'm not an American citizen, and I don't have to live there, and it's not my. But I do have to look at and try to understand. And then understand how, as best we can manage situations or scenarios that eventuate out of this policy, to towards stability or towards minimization of loss of human life. Or to the example of sort of advocating for the ceasefire and all of that stuff with Israel and Hamas, and how we have long-term stability, or highlighting the risks that come with expansion or convergence of that war into other conflicts. But I don't know. I don't know if we can. I don't know if we have the will to solve it. Would be the greater concern. And that's kind of when I look at the world, and all you see is expansion of violence. You see expansion of instability in Africa. You see more ISIS. You see more this. You see more that. You see more. You see a lot of internal social stresses in Western countries. We're seeing, the least, not the rise of racism. It's a bit like anti-Semitism was probably being hidden for a long time, but now people feel they can be comfortable being racist, and it's like, that's not good. So we have this whole situation where nothing is getting better, and our politicians don't seem to really even have ideas on how to make things better, how to decelerate wars, and how to increase social cohesion, and how to fix our economies. And then at the same time, we're barreling along towards AI. And this is a conversation I had with governments, saying, like, 4 or 5 years ago, I say, you need to look at what the impact of AI will be on employment. It's going to displace white collar workers. It's going to displace them very quickly, because once it's out and then the adoption is there, then it will not go back in the box. And if there's no, but it also changes education, because now we're also seeing people, universities like, oh, okay, well, what's our policy on ChatGPT or LLMs? But we have no plan. And then when I was talking about the governments, they didn't get it. And it's like, what are you preparing your university students for? Okay. People doing law degrees right now, they're going to come out, no jobs for juniors because a law LLM is doing the work. Okay. Doctors, there's a diagnostic process, which is basically, they look at they ask you questions, and they look at the thing, your skin or your thing, and they poke you, and they look at a book and they say, I think it's this. AI can do that better. So, and then if you look at your intake in high school, what are we going to teach kids? Or what jobs are we preparing kids for when they come out of high school? And so you have all this stuff happening at the same time. Breakdown of rules-based order, transformation of the labor force, multipolarization, and rising, and politicians using social disenfranchisement for political gain, fanning those flames. None of this is good. And then we're bombarded as human beings with, if you take the Vietnam War, was the first real televised war. Now we have social media. Every minute of the day, it's pictures of people being killed every minute. And it's horrible. And we're getting bombarded with violent rhetoric, violent imagery, division. So I'm really don't know where we are for this.
You're not describing a very fun world to live in. You're describing something that's pretty fucked up and broken. I mean, obviously there's conflict, and those things are pretty hard to stop, but you're not acting like you're very positive about how Jordan, Egypt, and Israel will get along in the future, or how France and, I mean, I'll just say England, right? You guys have a bit of a history with France and not getting along. I mean, are you is this degradation because we're less of a hegemon now than we were before? And there's people who are like, we're fine. And people who are like, it's all falling apart. So I'm not sure where we are in the real world, but are you telling me that you're seeing a general trend towards destabilization in a lot of places? Pete would say in general, instability is the norm in most of the world. It's very hard. So tight rubber band you have to hold to keep stability in place. And so we're very fortunate in places that have stability, that we have it, and it's precious. And if we don't act like it, then we don't lose it. Yeah.
That a lot of work goes into a lot of situations to keep that stability, like keeping Egypt away from going into war with Israel.
Right.
keeping that war from not expanding. Witkoff's done a
Yeah.
pretty good job. Something that I raised a great deal of times in official briefings was the risk of Egypt, because their concern is Israel militarizes southern Gaza, and then they want to push into Sinai as part of the religious rights objectives for Greater Israel, which annexes large amounts of territory for a lot of countries.
Right.
And the religious right is very committed to this vision. And they are what's been holding the coalition together at some, that's kept Netanyahu in power, and Netanyahu keeps having to give in to their demands, so he avoids the charges against him. So it's a very unstable situation where he needs a war. He really needs a war, because without one, he'll be in trouble. So if Witkoff and Trump force a ceasefire in Gaza, or it just becomes too untenable to continue, then he'll most likely bomb Iran, because he needs a war. It's just, and so what I worry about is convergence.
Yeah.
So if you get kinetic activity or instability in Egypt or whatever, or a war between Israel and Egypt, then we're going to see what happens in Iraq. How does this contamination spread? What else does this uncork? And at the same time, we end up with, if we get more war in the Middle East, then the West is very distracted by rising instability, problems with oil, and then so anyone that's opportunistic, whether that's Putin deciding he wants to go and take Moldova or something else because the West is busy and we're firefighting any fires, or maybe Xi decides that it's the right time for Taiwan. Because that's, world wars don't begin where it's like everybody just decides, let's fight each other. Let's just go at it all at once. It's one country comes in, another country comes in, and boom, 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 and they square off into general alliances. And we're there, but it's just what I would call the precursor indicators. Really scary. I mean, I say the lack of the political division in a lot of Western countries. America's certainly not unique in it. The nascent economic crisis that we're all facing with the transformation of work and the economies in general are not looking great. And then these things have a habit of kind of being present when wars come out. Bad economies, fractured societies. Someone spikes up some nationalism to win some votes, and then the nationalists need an enemy to direct their anger at.
Right.
But it's just in general, I'm not feeling confident about much. And I think we're traumatizing generations of people with all of this chaos and this just doom scrolling every day. It's like you take a couple of days of social media. It's like, oh, I feel strangely better. No human being can look at just endless rotations of children with limbs missing and not be affected if you have any level of empathy at all. And that to me is worrying. And I don't think, it's just, I'm worried in general.
Yeah. Whew, man. When you look at Israel and Hamas, let me back up a little bit, because we're going to get back into this very topic here. So this past week, we saw the story about people being shot as they went for aid. A lot of people instantly go to, I hate Jews, the Jews killed them, I don't care what anybody else says, let's attack people in other cities and other nations. And then there's people like me, I'm in this, people are like, hey, when has the Ministry of Health from Hamas been a reliable source for information? I'm not saying they're lying this time, but they've done a lot of lying. So let's wait and see, right? And then there's the folks that are like pro-Israel side, and they instantly are like, nope, that's Hamas, fuck them all, they deserve to die. Right? So and there's probably some other groups, but this is where we all predictably fall into. I don't know what the answer is. I'm not there. I'm not going to stand on any one fact and say this is what happened. It could all be fake. Maybe nobody died that day. I doubt it. But
something happened.
Something happened. Yeah. Why do we
That's
keep
clear.
falling for these same traps? Is it just a human thing where we're just going to stick on our side and very few of us are going to be able to say, I don't know what's going on. It's horrible. And I'm not going
I
to,
mean,
yeah,
the problem with polarization is if you choose not to choose a side, then they will attack you. If you choose a
right,
side, then you're expected to always shout down the opposition, even if your side did something wrong, and the other side
right,
maybe did something right. It's like,
yeah,
you know, if you're expected to hate Donald Trump at all times, or you're expected to hate Biden at all times, and both of them will do good or bad things at
yeah,
times. So that no one is sort of monochrome in that sense. But yeah, so that event I've been following, but I haven't drawn a conclusion other than that that a shooting event occurred. I'm not clear on who exactly because of the conflicting reports, but the propaganda machines of Hamas and the Israeli Hezbollah will both spin up within seconds
right.
to distort it and accrue blame to the other side, which also absolves responsibility and accountability because now it's too muddy to understand what actually happened or
Right.
who did what. But unlike you, I sit back and I reserve judgment until I've been over the facts. So I've spoken to people that were there that understood what happened. I've listened to a number of witnesses, um, different from completely different sources. So it's not like three people from the same group. But I haven't
Mm-hmm.
had enough time to do that with this because it just moves so fast. Like today, it's come out and Netanyahu on television talking about arming a jihadist militia to fight Hamas, and that's been reported as ISIS affiliated. But the individual in charge of the militia is used to fight ISIS, so
Right.
it's. But I don't believe that it would be intended to stabilize or put a civilian authority in power. So I don't know what's going on with that. I don't know what it is.
Mm.
I'm not going to have an opinion about it because I'm not sure what I'm looking at. I
Right.
don't trust the motivations of it. Because I don't think that Netanyahu would have engaged with Fatah or other parties, with the arming of this militia with the intent of a two-state solution. That's just not gonna be on the cards. So what is it? I don't know. But these
Right.
things happen fast. Everyone jumps up and says, it's this. And it's like, maybe it is, maybe it isn't.
Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Wait. Okay. Wait. Let me jump in there because maybe it is, maybe it isn't, and trying to look ahead. You said the word two-state solution. I think both
Mhm.
sides have said out loud, "Hey, we don't want a two-state solution. It just doesn't
I
seem to be what they
don't
want."
think
Does that matter?
that's, I don't think that's necessarily true.
Okay.
I think that what you'd find is that the Netanyahu government with the right-wing coalition is absolutely against a two-state solution because the vision of the right-wing religious groups, Smotrich and Ben Gvir, is to annex Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
Now, would most Israelis want to live in peace with a two-state? I believe the latest polls today were very heavily towards that conclusion. So you have to separate Israel from Netanyahu. There's a two. The Israeli people are. It's like trying to say that every American agrees with its administration. That's never the case. Now, if you talk to the Palestinian Authority, they will happily have a two-state solution and live peacefully next to Israel. Absolutely. Hamas has been willing to leave power and hand over to a technocratic civilian committee since at least September last year. So Witkoff started talking about it now as something new, and we were briefing on that under Biden last year. So Hamas has been willing to do that for a long time. And so in that sense, if Hamas leaves power, then we're talking about a two-state solution. Because a civilian technocratic government comes in, and then it will be, expected to maintain peace and order, but if development or reconstruction of Gaza is to happen, it's a two-state, unless it's annexed entirely. But I'm not sure that global capital would feel so great about investing in, you certainly wouldn't get Gulf capital investing in turning an annexed Gaza into some sort of resort destination. It would be unpalatable in the extreme, and unpalatable probably for a lot of international capital. But so yeah, it's much more complex than that. But two-state
Yeah.
solution is the way for peace, and Palestinians have a right to dignity. They have a right to self-determination. Israel has a right to exist equally, also. Um,
Yeah. Right. And Hamas is involved in the negotiations, and well, look, they're an international terrorist organization, right? So how do we deal with that? And then again, a two-state solution could be a lot of things. We've had a form of a two-state solution in the past, and it doesn't seem to hold. And there is just a seething anger, which can't have lessened in the last two
well,
years.
if you look at Palestinians and you read what Palestinians write, they protest against Hamas. They're angry
Mm-hmm.
because Hamas brought this horrible war to their homes, which are all destroyed, and brought
Mm-hmm.
starvation to their children. It's those it hasn't killed, it's maimed physically or psychologically. It's been dreadful. And so they know that Hamas, a minority, what was Hamas, 20,000 fighters, and this is usual.
Yeah.
2 million people. Taliban, at one point there were 5,000, and maybe they're 40 or 50 or 100,000 now, controlling 40 million people. The Houthi, 400,000 controlling 35 million people.
Right.
So this is not. So the two-state or the situation requires Hamas to leave power and most likely exile leadership permanently. That was the brilliant technocratic plan. Is they cannot, and so that whole narrative, like, oh, it's a reward for terrorism. No, it's not. It's actually, if you want to define what defeating Hamas means,
Yeah.
if defeating Hamas means that Hamas leaves power and Gaza doesn't pose a threat to Israel ever again, that can be achieved. If defeating Hamas means killing all of them, then that's going to mean more war. Or if there is no plan to defeat Hamas, it's just to drag this war out forever.
Right.
Then that whole conversation is moot. So I speak to a lot of Palestinians on a fairly regular basis, and you really do see that they aren't pro Hamas.
Yeah.
So much suffering and so much disaster and so much loss of life. It's incalculable, the amount of suffering that.
Yeah. It's a mess, and we haven't talked about neighboring pretty big differences in distance and everything, but still, Yemen's a mess, Libya's a mess, Syria's a mess. Iraq is a form of a mess, but these places are just destroyed. I don't know that anyone has any idea what a way ahead looks like for Lebanon. And I don't know that. Look, I don't think that this current administration for the U.S. has the wherewithal to solve all these things. I don't know that there's any administration from the U.S. that could do it. Sorry, go ahead.
I think that what the current administration's approach is really that this is not our problem. You guys sort it out. And I think POTUS said something like today about Ukraine and Russia are like two children fighting in a park, and maybe we should just let them fight some more.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a great way to look at the loss of life and the conflict and the costs. The human cost of that war, calling it like a fight in a park. There's been a lot of people killed, a lot of suffering. But that's what I see is Trump's view is to pull America back from being responsible for solving these problems, that he will look at and say, well, that country is 6,000 miles away.
Yeah.
Right. There are countries, 500 miles away, with the Gulf states or whatever, or whoever, and it should be their problem. That the Middle East should solve its own problems because we haven't managed to do that. And I think it's kind of where he's almost getting to with Russia and Ukraine. Like, well, this is a European problem.
Right.
I'm talking about the funding of Ukraine or whatever else. And I think that's just his mindset. Is it?
I mean, that is a fair mindset, right? To say, hey, you guys need to lean on this a little bit, because I see, and look, and this is just an American point of view, but as we look at places like UAE, Qatar,
Mhm.
Saudi Arabia, they are, I don't want to say westernizing, but they are becoming very modern, big, beautiful places that
Mhm.
people in the world want to go to, right?
Yeah.
And it is great to invest in your country and become this fantastic thing that's part of where we want to go forward, and everybody's got their bad histories. We'll set that aside for a second. But do they have the wherewithal to check up these other
I,
places that are in bad shape? Because it should be Arabs leading Arabs, Islamic people leading Islamic people in that way. That is a fair thing to say if you don't want an American solution, because I guarantee you our solution is going to involve a lot of things that they don't want because we love to export problems.
yeah, I mean that's very much what has happened in the past, and is there a reason to believe that an American-led solution would be the best solution? But it's then, how do you get a regional or indigenous solution that's effective? And what's the correct kind of support to provide that? You know, it's a bit like Syria at the moment. And you ask about, what is it to deal with terrorists when you know, Jelani's come in leading the country, former Al Qaeda, um, and we don't necessarily know how this will end. But there's a
Mm,
lot of diplomacy, and sanctions have been dropped, and you know, it's hard to say. I don't, and I say that when I talk about what I perceive as Trump's approach to international problems, it's that's the analysis of it. I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. It's just what
right.
I see. Um, and then if it's what we see, then okay, then we ask the questions that you ask. How capable is the region of being able to provide a solution?
Right.
Uh, is it more complex with Israel because of its close relationship with the United States? I would say yes. Because of its close relationship with the United States, does that mean the United States is inherently a stakeholder? Most likely, yes. So it can't be totally hands off
Mm,
because of,
hmm
of, of that close relationship. So it's a bit, those dynamics are a little, complex. Um, but that's just generally the tonality that I get, is that I don't know. I mean, you look at Mexico, which does border the United States. Um, Trump designates the cartels as FTOs and demands Mexican cooperation on
Right.
cartels, but the U.S. is not cooperating with Mexico. Um, what it's really happened is vividly destabilizing Mexico and changing cartel dynamics. And so it's not kind of making these very big, bold statements is one thing. He's kind of throw a hand grenade into the room and then negotiate.
Yeah.
But a lot of these guys can throw hand grenades right back at you.
Yeah.
Um, and that's kind of what we see. So it's really tough because those big hand grenade statements are destabilizing to markets. They are destabilizing to countries.
hmm
And then if there's some inference of an expectation, like on counter narcotics or something, and then there's not follow through, then that sends a confusing message that okay, it's just rhetoric, um, not not a matter of substance. Um,
hmm
and so the Dutch have very, very low confidence, um, in our ability. I mean, Europe's a bit interesting at the moment. I'm seeing more European cohesion on issues like Ukraine, but at the same time, we're watching, Germany having private sector bankruptcies just, at a vast rate. So we've got this economic instability again. We've got this. I'm just not feeling positive. Your U.S. jobless rates, 247,000 people registered for unemployment. That's up above expectation. And so I was like, not feeling good.
Yeah. Yeah. Boy, that's how many partners have to be aligned in a way that makes sense? Let's say, just for example, right now, because he's the current boss right now, let's say Donald Trump is right and that this is more of an Arab world problem and more of a European problem. And we're glad to come in when you guys are ready for our help. Let us know specifically what you need and we'll decide then. Who
Well,
else
I mean,
needs to be? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, the first thing that would have to happen for that scenario to be meaningful is the U.S. would have to decouple it from Israel, which is unlikely
Yeah,
because
we're not doing that.
it can't be a regional solution if at any point, like the Egypt plan came out, which was a reaction to Rubio's statement that, okay, if you don't like this U.S. plan, come up with your own. Then Egypt put out, quite a comprehensive, quite a robust plan. And then obviously Netanyahu doesn't want that plan. And Netanyahu's been trying to implement the Trump plan, what was what he calls it. And I'm not sure how the administration feels about that, which was basically forced displacement of every single Gazan.
Mm-hmm.
And Netanyahu will say frequently, we're going ahead with the Trump plan. It's like, oh, okay, I'm not sure that plan's still on the table. It's endorsed by the President of the United States. You might want to be careful.
Yeah.
In a way, attaching the president to that plan as if it's an endorsement when it could very well come back as a war crime. Although the United States doesn't recognize Hague or anything else, there are these things tend to bite in other ways.
Yeah.
So it's
let me continue with the premise, because I hear what you're saying, right? Because these things are always complex. Who else needs to be capable? And we'll just do the Arab world or Europe or both together, but who else needs to be competent enough to lead something like this? Because it's hard. It's hard to get Europe to go in one direction. It's essentially impossible to get the Arab world to go in one direction. So how do we deal with that? The other aspects of who are the other polar heads that have to pull in one direction so that we can?
Your best countries would be Saudi, Egypt, UAE, and with Jordan kind of providing some, political and regional contextual support. That would be it. But as I said, while the Israel-U.S. political relationship exists, it kind of gives the ability to pull America in and try to veto anything.
Yeah.
That it's not, you can't do that at this point. And obviously, you've got Netanyahu who's been trying to drag America into war against Iran for the past 20 years. And I don't think Americans want another war in the Middle East.
No, we're sick of that stuff. I will say this: if Pete was president, that's never going to happen. I never, ever am I going to leave Israel, especially now that I've seen all this anti-Semitism that people are desperate to put online and go out and do. But no, that's all right. They're our progeny. They're there. We're like family, It doesn't mean that they get to act like assholes, but that's a different problem. And so there's no way that I could see us stepping back from Israel, just like there's no way we're going to step back from Taiwan. We have these things where we are hegemonic, right? And we are we will behave in this way.
Taiwan was only because of their chips and semiconductors. And as that comes natively produced in the United States, their strategic value is minimal. Israeli society needs to deal with its issues internally in and of itself. I mean, it's had a lot of constitutional issues. It's had a lot of issues with courts being restructured and these other things. And then to be a healthy society again, it's had a lot of loss. It's had a lot of trauma. It needs to deal with settlers. I mean, they're still at it in the West Bank, incredibly violent. The right wing are very violent in Israel itself. So it's got to have a lot of introspection to kind of heal itself as well from all the things that have happened. But that's the reason that we can't look at it, or Trump can't look at it as just purely a regional problem,
right?
Because of the special relationship between Israel and the United States. But it's how do you responsibly bring an end to this war and create peace by using that special relationship, and ultimately making Israel more secure, and by having Gaza not pose a threat. And Witkoff's been quite good, but all we've really seen is, we saw some hostages come back, and then we saw Eden Alexander come back, but we haven't seen any forward movement beyond that.
Yeah.
And because that's kind of like, where we sit is like, okay, a lot of work on advocacy, a lot of work on what post-Hamas Gaza looks like, with communicating with the PA and listening to them, and like, okay, how would this work, and just kind of helping express models for what that might look like in the future. And at a point, it's like, okay, well, now we have to see if Witkoff and others, and whether the Arab states who are investing huge amounts of money into the United States, of which I would expect there's a condition that Trump bring an end to the war in Gaza. Because if you're taking X amount from Saudi and X amount from the UAE, that level of money has political ask.
No.
No. They're not. The UAE doesn't invest outside of itself very much. Some of the royals will invest in, say, a football team or whatever. That's a prestige move. Not really strategic capital. This volume of strategic capital in the United States is indicative of there will be some expectation. And then I would assume Gaza. I have no knowledge of this being a fact. I'm clear about that. That would be my estimation on that.
When you look ahead and you see a better future, not the best, not ideal, but let's say that in 1 year's time, the big conflicts in Ukraine, Russia, Hamas, Israel, let's say that those are calmed down, and then the secondary, tertiary things in the Arab world maybe kind of deflate with it. What's that path forward look like today? And I'm ready for the news to break that completely confounds what you say, because this happens all the time, because the Arab world is bananas to understand.
I don't see it.
You don't see it. Okay.
So some people I try to explain to some people that the striking of the strategic bombers, hailed as a great big success done without informing the United States. But as Ukraine relies heavily on U.S. weaponry and whatever else, so Europe's taking on more of that weight, it's still heavily dependent. And there's a thing called the New START Treaty, where strategic bombers have to sit out in the open. That's where they have to be. And the Russians left, or didn't leave it, they suspended New START in February 23, but they kept abiding by a lot of the basic principles. And so that was hitting those as kind of a beneficiary of U.S. support without telling the U.S. When those planes are parked as part of a treaty that's meant to make us all safer, it wasn't necessarily a great idea. And that forces Putin is going to make some kind of major response to that. I would have expected, and I believe, that we would have seen a ceasefire this summer. I have good reasons to believe that. And that, unfortunately, because of pushback, I lost it for a second.
You're there. I got you.
Internet says, there we go. Sorry about that. So because of when there's pushback, we haven't seen cohesive response from the administration in terms of being able to get things back on track necessarily as effectively as one would hope. And so Putin has now probably calculated that how much territory he can gain in a ceasefire. Now, the strike on the strategic bombers, apart from we'll see them, they will not be kept on airfields. I think I saw something yesterday about China moving theirs into underground bunkers or reinforced. It's like, okay, the whole world has got a lot less safe. And so I don't know if we'll see a ceasefire now because of that strike. Because whatever Putin has to do to retain his prestige after having that fleet hit is going to be dramatic. So I don't see that. I don't see peace in the Middle East while Netanyahu is in power. I mean, because I said he needs a war, and we dealt with it a lot with the sabotage of ceasefire talks all the time. We saw it firsthand, and nobody really wanted to believe us at the time. But it's very clear and apparent to the whole world now that this is what's happening. So as long as he is in power, there will be a war.
Mm.
If he would lose an election today, that's the polls are showing that quite clearly. But it's if there is an election, I'm just not seeing it right now.
Yeah.
If we could end Gaza, if we could end Ukraine, then it would be good. And if we could start to be sensible, I mean, the only surety that we know from war is yes, we can destroy each other, and we.
Yeah, no doubt about that.
What do you really win? All right,
Yeah.
a whole lot of people die, and
A whole lot of
eventually
people
one
die.
day you're going to sit around a table and make peace.
Yeah. A whole lot of people die, and nobody up top is held accountable. Maybe every now and then you'll drag a world leader through the streets and torture them, but everybody else pretty much just takes off and goes. So it's not a lot of accountability like there could be. Meanwhile, some farmer gets conscripted into some kind of fight, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not
I mean,
it's not what either of us like. We don't like these things.
I mean, you look at the Russians. They're conscripted. These are schoolboys basically being conscripted, given a few weeks training or frontline to a meat grinder, and they don't probably want to be there fighting that war.
Right.
And it's just tragedy mounted on tragedy, and we don't live in a world where the Romans conquer the world and everybody speaks Latin. We don't live in a world where the Mongols conquer the world and then you own territory and you own resource, and we don't live in that world anymore.
Yeah.
And so we know that war will end, and we know what the outcomes of war are when we do it. Why don't we just try to be fair? Why don't we just try to solve the issues rather? We're launching missiles at each other. Why don't we just on a table, work this out? Because I'm finding it hard to be positive. But it's also, I think, maybe that's a process.
Yeah.
I think it's important. I think about this a lot because sometimes the work is very affecting, and I'm usually very, very capable of being compassionately empathetic, not detached, but not overwhelmed by the emotion of the things or the stuff that we have to contend with, or the challenges or the threats.
Yeah.
But it's just so relentless that even I'm finding myself at points of exhaustion of my sense of humanity, and I'm not sure how the wider population is coping with this barrage of misery. And it's like, man, I just want to see some hope, some real hope, not poster hope. I want to get up, read the news one day, and say, "Wow, the world cured cancer, or something good happened, or we ended a war, and we shook hands, or we did something great for humanity, and we're just going down this spiral of misery."
Let me jump in and ask you this, and then I'm going to wrap it up with you because I don't want to take you more time. And I always love when we talk. Is any peace?
Oh, so do I.
Yeah, is any peace in Israel or Ukraine worth it, even if it's the shittiest one we have and it's not likely to stay and we work like our asses off? At least we get back to talking instead of fighting. Is any peace better, or does it have to be above a certain quality of peace, do you think? And I don't know what the answer to that is myself, by the way.
That's a good question, and I like that you asked some the hard questions. These things will help, in the weeks that follow after talking. Those will be considerations while working on some of these things, some of these scenario models. On the Ukraine side, I think my instinct is any peace is better that stops the killing, even for a time, while we get around the table. Unfortunately, both Putin and Netanyahu will only negotiate while bombarding their adversaries. And both of them are the same with that regard. Negotiating under fire, they call it.
Yeah.
So any peace that saves lives is good. Now, as to what concessions that are arrived at in conditions of peace, that's a decision for the Ukrainians or the people in those territories to make. That's not a decision that I think that we have a right to sort of say we've decided this is what we think is acceptable peace, and you're going to live with it. So if we have any concept of sovereignty, then those nations need to decide that for themselves. But in the interim, at the base level, I would have expected that if we're talking about peace negotiations, you stop dropping the freaking bombs while you're
Yeah,
negotiating. Let's show some
it's
goodwill.
yeah, yeah.
A war
Please,
peace.
I mean, it strikes me a little bit funny that as I think about this, if we had a free and fair election, whatever the fuck that means,
Mm-hmm.
there's
Mm-hmm.
a good chance that Putin, not still president, Zelensky, not president, Netanyahu, not prime minister,
Erdogan,
I,
president.
the Ayatollah wouldn't
Yep.
win. So we got a bunch of people who don't want an election, and I didn't do the whole this Trump. I have no idea, right? Like if he was to run, he could legally run again and could legally be president. Would he win? He's still kind of early, and there's still a lot of hope about who he is, what he might do. There's also a lot of terror and angst. So we're always 50-50 here, right? And so let's say that it's
Yeah.
not guaranteed that he would win. But if anyone did, everyone would say, "Oh, they cheated." If any of those guys won, So that's how crazy this world is. Is these guys aren't incentivized to have an open election? None of them.
I mean, we're just at a point now where even it was even in the United States. I don't know what the polls are where I am in the UK, but there's no trust in government, and nobody knows if the government is telling the population the truth.
Right.
Right.
Well, this goes back to that Gaza Ministry of Health thing. Like, I don't know, and you haven't earned my trust. And so when our Washington Post puts out that headline, and I'm like, you fools.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you race to do that?
Yeah.
Write it so it's ambiguous and say there was an attack. There was an attack. It's possible this many people die. Sources are conflicted, but they don't. They rush in and inflame instead, and now they had to print this correction, and they've made a more milky headline.
Well, that's
and
the
so
whole problem with social media, though, because ultimately most people consume media online, and to get clicks for the article, you need to have provocative headline.
Right.
And when they get clicks, that's how they get their revenue these days. So responsible
got to have that revenue.
Yep. Outrage clicks are much greater and more shares and more engagement than responsible journalism.
Yeah.
Try to be as patient as I can in spaces, as objective as I can in social media or in essays or in any of the work. There's a moral responsibility on that.
Yeah.
But you don't get the attention of a screaming, frothing mouth, talking head, and at some level, you kind of hope that people will become tired of just having their endocrine systems pumped with rage, and we'll come to a point that I actually want to understand this. I want to understand how we can do better. I want to be able to have difficult conversations maturely that aren't about blame, not about hate, not about division, that are about how do we come together around a problem and just recognize our common humanity, the first starting point. Whether or not
we could ditch these algorithms that promote hate.
I'm able to brief at very, very high levels and be engaged at very, very high levels and do work at very, very high levels. I also get left alone, though, to be nice, which is very fair. Nobody gets in my way. But I do think that the work goes the places that it goes because it is neutral. And it has gone to the UN, the UNSC, it's gone to the EU, it's gone everywhere. But it's not like I have a giant following, but and that's, I guess, the benefit. Nobody bothers me. Nobody kind of gets in my face or tries to manipulate me into saying something that I don't believe, or entice me into a position that is not, not policy. Because think tanks have policy. They have their political masters. They're funding masters.
Are they?
So you have to.
Are they? I mean, they have masters. They have people that pay them for decisions. I mean, I'm pretty critical of most of them when I see they. Yeah. I don't even want to get into think tanks and my disdain for as a class.
No, but it's part of the whole information. If we look at the crisis of what we have a crisis of belief in government in Western societies.
Yes.
We have a crisis of information with polarization, propaganda, and divisiveness. We have weaponization of issues like anti-Semitism or race. But it all comes back really to a very sick and unhealthy information surface.
Yeah.
That is the
Yeah.
root of the problem. That is it. And unfortunately, social media is the amplifier.
I love it. It's a great chat, man. It's always informative when
It's
you
always a
talk.
great chat.
Yeah. I'm dying not to say anything else about think tanks right now, so I just want to blurt out a bunch of stuff, but it's for another time. And just in general, I appreciate it.
It is for another time. But as I say, it's part of the information sickness, and they are a part of it.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Well, listen, I appreciate you coming on. Everybody, Scott Richards, I mean, what else are you going to say? It's incredible getting a chance to talk to you. Super insider, and this guy negotiates things. He talks to people. He's part of these things. And so we're very fortunate to have you here, Scott. Thank you very much for coming on.
Good.
I will see all of you tomorrow. A little lighter topic. I warned everybody yesterday. I'm like, get ready. Scott's going to be kicking us in the nuts here, but I always appreciate you, man. So I'll come back and say bye to you in a second. Everybody else, I'll see y'all tomorrow.